Coming up on Outlook, it's called Mothers Against Drunk Driving, organized in 1980 after founder Candy Lightner lost her daughter to a repeat drunk driving offender. It was then that she said no more, and she vowed to raise awareness. And while the MADD organization has certainly raised the profile of the dangers of driving under the influence, one death at the hands of an impaired driver is one too many. The Kentucky chapter of MADD recently went to Frankfurt to talk to legislators in support of something called Mission Interlock. We're going to talk more about that on Outlook up next. Hello and welcome to Outlook. I'm your host, Barbara Deeb. On the program today, we're going to be talking about MADD. You know it, Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. Now it's Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And there's a new initiative. It's talking about buzzed and impaired drivers and a whole lot more. We're going to find out the story behind MADD in Kentucky as we welcome to the program three individuals in the know. We start with Luann McElmurray, who is with MADD of Kentucky. Thank you for being here. In addition, also with MADD of Kentucky is Rosalind Donald. Thank you as well. Teresa Martinez joins us. She's a volunteer with MADD. She got involved with MADD right after her daughter Ashley, at the age of 23, who was killed by a drunk driver. Thank you for being here and sharing your story. And probably before we get started, to really set a framework on what we're talking about when we talk about impaired and drunk drivers, I'm going to defer to you and share your story. Your daughter, beautiful, Ashley, 23 years old. She was just going on a movie night.
Ashley and she was killed April 29th, 2012, and it was she was an Indiana University Southeast student. She was studying to be an elementary school teacher, and it had been finals that week. And on Saturday, her friends had decided to go out to celebrate their week after finals. And they went to Chick-fil-A to eat. They went to see the movie American Pie. And then they went to a friend's house to see the sequels of the American Pie. Well, my daughter Ashley was very adamant about being home at 2 o'clock in the morning. And as a mother, when your child is not home by a certain time, your heart just palpitates. So at 2:30, nothing. 3 o'clock, I'm texting, I'm calling. I heard nothing. So I'm thinking to myself, well, Ashley had worked that day, you know, and maybe she had just fallen asleep at the friend's house. At 10 minutes till 5, the doorbell rings. So I go to my back door thinking Ashley, you know, the door was double locked, you know, she couldn't get in. As I walk through my house, I go to my daughter's bedroom and I open up the blind. When I look out the blind, there's a 4-door car parked in front of my driveway. As I go to the front door, I open it up. There's 2 gentlemen standing there. They asked me if my name is Teresa Martinez, and I said yes. And they said my daughter had been in an accident. So I invited them in, and they came in, and my husband said, well, what hospital is she in? And the 2 gentlemen that were standing there was the coroner and a police officer. The coroner had told me that my daughter had been killed by a drunk driver. There was a picture of my daughter sitting on my table, and I said that I held the picture to the coroner and the police officer, and I shook it to them, and I said, this can't be my daughter. There's no way this happened to my daughter. And I had my hands like this. The coroner took my hand and opened it up. He laid my daughter's necklace and my daughter's ring and placed it in my hand and folded it up. And that's when I knew that it was my daughter. And the coroner said that my daughter was a very beautiful girl. So you're still in shock, you know, like, no, this can't be happening. So I'm having to prepare a funeral for a daughter at 23 years old, which, being a parent, that's not something that you do. So I get ready to have her funeral, and because of it was a drunk driving, my daughter had to have an autopsy done, so she was laid open. So I had to go shopping to try to find some clothes to put my daughter in. And I have to tell you, that's probably one of the hardest shopping times that I'd ever done, is to go shop for my daughter to have something to lay her out in. So we went to the funeral home to make the arrangements, and they asked if we wanted to see my daughter. So we go downstairs to where my daughter was at, and I go down not knowing what to expect because I didn't have any idea what my daughter was going to look like. So I went downstairs, and there my daughter laid on a gurney. And I have to tell you, one of the hardest things that I wanted to do was just to be able to pick my daughter up and to just hold her. Because moms always make things right. Well, this was one thing that this mom could not make right. So we made the arrangements. We had the funeral for my daughter. And there was so many, my daughter touched so many lives that the people who came to the funeral home had waited an hour to get into the funeral home. And I remember standing there saying to everyone that was there that if my daughter touched this many lives at the age of 23, I couldn't imagine how many lives she would have touched if she had lived longer. So we have the funeral for my daughter. Now, and after that, I have to go through the process of the man who killed my daughter.
And what do we know about that man who killed your daughter?
He was, my daughter was traveling westbound. He was traveling eastbound in the westbound lane, and he hit my daughter head on. She severed a brainstem, died at the scene. He was 34 years old. He was 2 times the legal limit. He had cocaine in his system. He was here illegally. He had the vehicle he was driving did not belong to him, and it had no insurance. And he walked away with a broken leg. He was put in jail the day that it happened, and I went back and forth 2 and 3 times to court for court. I have to tell you, the first time I went to court, it took everything I had not to jump over that railing and strangle this man that had taken not only my daughter's life, but had taken my life, her dad's, her sister, her grandma, her family, everyone who was in contact with my daughter, their lives have been changed. So it took everything I had, and so we went back and forth, and with the prosecutor, we went back and forth to do a plea deal. First of all, it was 25 years, then it went to 20 years. Finally, it was 18 years. Well, one of my agreements was that he was not to receive shock probation. So he is in prison and has to serve 15 years. So he does not get out at all. And after 15 years, then I go in front of the parole board to see if he will stay out the rest of his 3 years for his 18 years.
So even with that, at 34 years old, he'll be 49 years old if he were to get out after the 15 years. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But once he does get out, deportation will be there to send him back to where he came from.
And he came from?
Guatemala.
Guatemala. Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you for sharing that story. That's not an easy story to tell, but you decided that after that happened, we're talking about MADD, Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, you decided once you got over the shock, does anyone ever really get over the shock of that? But you decided you were going to make a difference, that you were going to go share this story and maybe make it so that you could change someone else's life.
Right. Ashley is my inspiration, and she's what drives me to do this, because as a mother, I would never want anyone to have to experience the tragedy of the loss of a child due to a drunk driver, which drunk driving is so preventable that if you just make the right choice, then my daughter's life would have been saved.
So, you know, obviously this changes your life in so many ways, and you've heard so many stories as representatives of MADD. One of the largest ways it's changed your life is that you realize the preventable part of this whole story? That
Yes.
it could have been prevented?
It could have been prevented, yes.
We talked today in the office. We were talking about the, the show that was coming up, and we were talking about, play out these scenarios. You get that doorbell ring at 5 in the morning when your daughter hasn't come home, 2 gentlemen standing at your door in suits. This doesn't look good. What if you had 2 gentlemen standing there in suits and a police officer to tell you that you were under arrest because you had been drinking and driving and you hit somebody and you killed them? There's 2 sides to this.
I'm not sure I understand the premise that a cop would arrest you.
In other words, maybe you left the scene of an accident because
okay.
you were intoxicated, but come to find out you may have killed somebody.
Yes, I think a lot of times MADD focuses a lot on victim services. That's a part of our mission, is to support families such as the Martinez family. But oftentimes we don't hear a lot from the offender. And that's a big part of our narrative. In 1988, Larry Mahoney was responsible for 27 lives lost in the worst drunk driving crash in U.S. history, and that happened here in Kentucky. And we still work and serve the families of that crash.
The Carrollton bus crash.
The Carrollton bus crash of 1988, May 14th. But we don't really hear a lot from Larry Mahoney. And whenever we have the opportunity to speak with offenders, because we do get that opportunity a lot, we tell them, you're absolutely lucky that you were arrested, that a police officer got you off the road. Because in the greater sense of things, spending a night in jail, paying a fine, participating in an alcohol awareness class, that is very minimal. You could have been the offender that killed a lovely young woman like Ashley Martinez. You could have been Larry Mahoney driving down the wrong way on the expressway into a bus filled with our children, with Kentucky children. Innocent lives are lost, and it will be on your head. And I wouldn't wish that for anybody. And so I think what gets lost a lot in speaking about the mission, saving lives, is that this narrative that you could be this person. It's so preventable.
Let's talk about you could be this person, because again, the discussion earlier centered around the fact that what do the statistics bear out as far as, are these usually repeat offenders, alcoholics, or is it the person that doesn't drink that often, maybe had a little bit too much, thinks I can get in the car, I can drive? Are there any statistics to bear that out?
Well, there is a few. One statistic is that statistically, a person has driven 80 times before their first arrest. That even if you're caught for your first time, you've done it many times before your first arrest. Each day, people drive drunk almost 300 times, but fewer than 4,000 are arrested. And that statistic comes from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. From what we see, it's usually not the person's first time. It is a behavior, and it's a learned behavior. And that really what comes with education, and that's why we're so glad to have Ashley Martinez's story a part
to tell. And we have lots more to tell. We're talking about Mothers Against Drunk Driving. We're going to take a short break here on Outlook, but when we return, more about their initiative. Stay with us. Nearly 4 decades after its organization, the battle cry remains the same, maybe just a little bit louder. No more victims. For those we couldn't save, with those we have, to those we can. It's called MADD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and we have 3 representatives here sharing their stories. And in the first half of the show, we heard a very poignant story shared with us by Teresa Martinez about the loss of her daughter Ashley in April of 2012. She was killed at the hands of a drunk driver. I'm going to call it at the hands of a drunk driver. In addition, Luann McElmurray joins us, and Rosalind Donald with MADD of Kentucky. So before the break, we were talking, you shared that amazing story and how your daughter Ashley now serves as the inspiration for you and so many others to keep people off the road when they're impaired. There's a buzzed and a drunk driving sort of initiative underway. Help us understand what that means, Luann, that maybe you're not drunk, but you might be a little buzzed?
Right. Well, I think any amount is too much, and what we want to make sure that people realize is one drink is too many. When you're going to drive, make other arrangements, make a different plan always have a plan B when you get ready to, if you know, it's like Mothers Against Drunk Driving isn't a prohibitionist, but we are against, driving under the influence because it's a choice and it's preventable. You can decide not to do it.
It is a choice. I do have to say the DD, the designated driving, I have 3 children who, are from teens to 20s, and they're really good about that. If they know that there's going to be some big event and that there are likely going to be people drinking or impaired, they have a designated driver. Has that made a difference?
Yes, MADD has worked with the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet, and they have an initiative called Be a Hero campaign, which awards and applauds the designated driver. Again, from my aspect, when working with a lot of offenders, it is that failure to make a plan. And if you're over the age of 21 and you're legally able to consume alcohol, you know that's going to be happening before you do it. And sometimes it comes down to just making a plan, having a phone number, taxi number available, because by the time you've been drinking and you've been drinking for some time, you're not at a point to judge whether you're able to make it home safely. And then that's where the battle is lost, and then someone makes that choice to drink and drive when there is a lot of opportunity to get a friend, find a cab,
call a parent.
Yeah,
Call a parent.
Yeah, call anybody to get you home. But those decisions usually need to be made up front before any of that alcohol starts.
That's a good point. There's something called, it's an initiative, it's called Mission Interlock. But before we get into that, what is the legal limit in the state of Kentucky when someone is drunk?
The legal limit is .08.
Okay. So it could be you're just under, and maybe you decide you're going to have one more little sip of wine and it's going to take you over and it's going to make you legally drunk. But like you say, people have driven nearly 80 times often before they get caught.
And it's important to know that the BAC .08 is a per se limit. It is not necessarily a limit that if you are under that and you cause a fatal crash or cause property damage, that you still cannot be prosecuted. That's just not true. It's a per se limit, meaning that it's a limit that is suggested. Of course, we use that, but if you have drank something and it's in your system, and you cause a crash, then you can be arrested and you can be charged with some crime.
If it isn't bad enough, bad doesn't even begin to tell, but you lose your daughter to a drunk driver, but then it becomes a criminal investigation.
Yes.
Because this individual then is going to go to court. And I'm sure there's a part of you, like you said, the first time you went to court, it was all you could do not to jump over that bar and strangle this person who took your daughter's life. But there comes a point where you have to realize that the law has to take its hand and take control. You remember that point when you were going through all of that and just said it's just going to have to happen that way?
Yes, that's why we went back and forth with a plea deal. We went, I went to court 3 times between April. He was sentenced in November. I was a fortunate person to have mine only go from April to November. Some of them are out there for years. I was very, very, very fortunate that mine only lasted that time frame to have to go through the court system, because it's tough to go back into court to stare at the man who took your child away and then to sit there and go back and forth to hear what they have to say, and it's like, so the prosecution and I battled back and forth, presented it to his attorney until we finally came to agreement, and the defendant decided that he was going to accept the plea deal
And go 15 years and possibly 18.
Yes.
Did you ever get a sense of remorse from this man who took your daughter's life? Did he ever say, I'm sorry?
He spoke Spanish, so his sorry was done through his attorney. So, his attorney kind of said he was sorry, but I did have a civil suit, and the attorney that I had for the civil suit did go to the prison where he was at and did take one of Ashley's pictures to him so that he could actually see what she looked like.
Whose life he took.
Whose life he took, yeah.
Would that make a difference, though, if he were able to tell you and come to you and say, I'm really sorry?
I don't know that it would, but I guess just to feel like that, you know, that, hey, I made a bad choice that night, to apologize for what he did, you know, at least to acknowledge that you did make a bad choice one night, and this is what it caused. It cost someone their life.
Is forgiveness a part of the picture at some point?
Not right now.
Yeah.
Not right now.
It's too fresh.
Too fresh, yes.
Yeah.
It's too fresh.
I get that.
Because it's sad to say, but, you know, right now when I see him, he's still alive. He may be in prison, but he gets 3 meals a day. He has activities that he does in prison. You know, there's a library there, there's schooling there if they want it. You know, when my daughter life doesn't have that. You know, she was studying at IUS to be an elementary school teacher, and her life was cut short. You know, she didn't get an opportunity to get married, to have a family, to do any of that. You know, so it's very hard to do that right now.
I get that. I get that. But you're doing what you can on her behalf, on Ashley's behalf, by sharing this story.
Yes.
And we are hopeful, preventing someone from getting in the car when they've been drinking, just not to drive. You know, Rosalind, you shared a story. I guess everyone has a story to tell, but your father is he retired now?
My father passed away in 2004.
Okay, I'm sorry. He was a police officer with the Louisville Police Department.
Yeah, my father was, he began work in 1981. And was a police officer all the way to 2004, but he was also a police officer in Detroit, Michigan for several years too.
Yes, so that in a way inspired you to do what you do with MADD, in that he was often that first responder, or he was that person who had to go knock on the door and say to someone, your child's been in an accident. Yes,
my father was very different. He never really shared the stories that he experienced when he got home. For him, being a police officer was like being any other profession. When he took off his uniform, he was Larry. He was no longer Officer Donald, and he didn't like to mix a lot of what he saw into his life as a father. So I didn't really get a chance to see that. I see that now that I'm working with men and women who knew him. When we went through a lot of our files that are from the 80s, I had the opportunity, and I felt that I saw his name on a lot of police reports, and to see that we are connected in that way. The only time that I ever remembered his life with the work I do now and the work he did kind of correlating, and my mother had to remind me of this, is when I was 12 years old and I was on my way to Kings Island. And I remember him not letting me out of the car when it was time to board the bus. And he was just so nervous. And I didn't understand why, being 12 years old, why he was so afraid for me to go to Kings Island. And it wasn't until I was doing work with the Carrollton bus crash and the survivors that my mother told me that he used to talk about how afraid he was. That the Carrollton bus crash, they were coming back from Kings Island, and that night, my father actually was working that night and was clearing the path for emergency ambulances to get to the hospital, and that stuck with him. And it didn't correlate with me being a 12-year-old girl, but that really affected him a lot. So,
as it affects so many, so many. Recently, Mothers Against Drunk Drivers took the initiative. They went to Frankfurt, and there's a renewed call for something called Mission Interlock. Can someone tell us what that is?
Well, it's Ignition Interlock.
I beg your pardon.
Yeah, Ignition Interlock. The Ignition Interlock system is a device that goes into the console of a car of a convicted drunk driver. And it's basically a breathalyzer system. You have to blow into it, and it unlocks your engine, and you're able to drive and carry on your duties.
So the renewed call for this is that 24 states have passed this legislation, and now you are hoping that Kentucky becomes number 25?
Yes.
What kind of response did you get?
I think our lobby day, we went down, spent the day. Senator Representative Keene was had a lot of support.
Well, Representative Keene, who almost lost his daughter in a drunk driving accident, so he's on board.
Very much so, and we had a good response. You know, we had our volunteers and victim survivors come and speak, and we're just hoping that the work we did and the conversations that we had throughout the day, you know, made a difference.
So continuing the work of MADD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, what would you say to our audience out there? You know, we're going to put up a contact number if someone needs victim support, but what would you say, you know, in the minute or so remaining? Leave us with some words of wisdom, each of you.
Well, I think it's important to understand that MADD started as a support group. That was its original foundation, and that's what we're here for. We're here to support families who have lost loved ones or families who have had people injured due to drunk driving crashes.
So you're there for that, Luann?
Right, and we do victim services. That's our specialty, is victim services. You know, if it's, you know, ranging from court accompaniment to just keeping, you know, prosecutors and victims kind of connected in a way, you know, because just having, we're kind of act as their voice too, you know, when it comes to media and things like that. If the family is not ready to do that, then we can do that as well. So, I mean, there's just a variety of services, make referrals out to the community.
Okay.
And just someone to listen.
Someone to listen. Luann McElmurray and Rosalind Donald have joined us with MADD of Kentucky. And Teresa Martinez has shared her time and her story about her beautiful daughter, Ashley, who was taken way too soon in 2012 at the hands of a drunk driver. What would you say to our audience to leave us with?
My thing would be for all parents to talk to their children about drinking and driving. Not only them drinking and driving, but never to get into a vehicle with someone who's been drinking and driving. And that if they are going out to drink, that they always have who's their designated driver, what are you going to do if the designator decides to drink, what is your plan B? And always remember, you can always call your parents.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that story. Always have a plan B. That's going to wrap it up for this week's edition of Outlook. We've been talking about MADD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. I'm Barbara Deeb. We're glad you joined us. That was really nice. How do you feel about that?